Hi, everyone. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is contributor Melody Wilding. Melody, I appreciate you hopping on today.
I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you.
We've got a really interesting conversation ahead of us. You recently wrote a piece for Forbes about people having trouble sleeping. And as of now, as of when we're sitting here, it has over 1.6 million views. So, what about struggling with sleep do you think really resonates with people?
Well, I think everyone is feeling more stress and anxiety than ever before. And one of the key ways that comes out is in our sleep. It's hard to fall asleep at night when your mind is racing with what ifs and worries about the future and all of the deadlines you have to keep up with. And really just shouldering all of the demands that we have to now. I think all of that can add to our stress, all of which affects our sleep. And for so many of us, we're still in a hybrid or fully working at home arrangement. And it can be really tough to find separation between when does professional time end and when does personal time begin. So finding that transition to even start to fall asleep, I find can be very difficult for people.
I find, when I'm working on my couch and I shut the laptop, it's weird to shut off your brain. Okay, I was just working a minute ago and I'm still in the same spot, but now it's more personal time. So, is this hybrid or remote work setup tougher for people to fall asleep?
I'm finding in my experience that it is much harder to fully disconnect because the laptop is always right there. Your phone is usually in your hand. And I don't know about you, but the first place I gravitate towards is checking my email or checking my social media. And then you're immediately stimulating your brain, you're back into problem solving mode. And that can really lead to not being able to fall asleep because you're not allowing yourself to fully disconnect and your brain is just always running 100%.
I'm a horrible sleeper, I'll admit. I go into bed, every night, I want a good night's sleep, but I grab my phone, I'm scrolling through social media, checking emails. How do you set yourself up for success? How do you shut off the phone, and what should you do? And how much do bedtime routines matter?
Yeah, what I thought was really interesting in talking with Dr. Wu is that she actually cautioned against having very high expectations around your sleep hygiene. I think we've all heard that you should have a bedtime routine. You want to make sure you're winding down and you're triggering your brain and your body to say, okay, now it's time to sleep. But what I thought she was interesting will probably resonate with a lot of other perfectionists and type A folks out there is that sometimes you can become so rigid about that routine that it ends up backfiring. Because if you don't get a chance to do it perfectly, then it it backfires and you feel anxious that you didn't go through your whole routine. And therefore, you go down a rabbit hole, a thought spiral of, well, now I'm not going to be able to get to sleep. What am I going to do? And so I love that she recommended that we take sort of a looser approach to this or a more relaxed approach that yes, you want to wind down at night. You don't want to be looking at your devices. You want to have that sort of disconnect time where you have a cutoff of this is when I stop doing highly stimulating work things so you can give your brain a break. But she really recommended sort of leaning into your own chronotype, which refers to the fact that we all have our own circadian rhythm. Some of us fall asleep on the earlier side, some of us on the later side. And you really need to know what's sort of your natural time for falling asleep. So she asked the question in the article that I thought was very insightful. She asked, if you were on vacation and you could go to sleep at any time you wanted naturally, when would that be? And I think that's very helpful to help us all optimize our schedule and know what our natural cycles are like. And she also recommended going to sleep when you're actually sleepy, not just when you're tired. And I think there's a difference there because you can be tired, but you're still very alert. Your brain is still on. But she made that distinction between being tired and being sleepy, which I thought could be very helpful for people.
What should you do if you're laying there and you want to go to sleep, but your brain is still on and you're alert? How do you turn that off?
Yeah. Dr. Wu said there actually is no way to turn your brain off fully. And I think all of us wish there was an actual off button. I sure do.
Of course.
um, But she said, to some extent, if you're not able to fall asleep, don't force it, right? The worst thing you can do is sit there and beat yourself up for not being able to fall asleep, or to ruminate and worry about all of the things you have to do in the morning and how you're not going to have enough energy. It just becomes this vicious cycle where then you won't sleep even more. So she recommended getting up, getting out of bed. She actually shared a really interesting story that back in, I think it was medieval European times, that people actually had a first sleep and a second sleep. So folks actually didn't sleep all through the night. They would get up in the middle of the night and actually socialize with other people and do things, which I had never heard and I thought was very interesting. So I think her main message was to stop putting such high expectations on yourself, because all of those can actually work against you in the end.
So if you get up in the middle of the night for, let's say, a bathroom break, that's not the end. You could still get a better night's sleep. You don't need to worry about that so much.
No, and what she was saying is that that's actually not a sign that you're a bad sleeper. Good sleepers wake up multiple times during the night. What's key is that you're able to fall back to sleep when you get to bed. What you don't want to do is get up, start worrying, start working on something to the point where then you can't fall back asleep. But no, it's not a problem if you're getting up to go to the bathroom, or personally, I find myself waking up, I'll be dreaming and then I'll sort of wake up and then I fall back asleep again. And according to Dr. Wu, that's not something we need to be too worried about.
Something that I do, I find myself doing a lot, is I get into bed, I feel like I'm tired, yet I'm laying there and I'm thinking about every embarrassing thing I've ever said since middle school. And I beat myself up. I have a busy day the next day. How do you change your relationship with sleep so, you can get there faster?
Yeah. I'll share something that I find personally very helpful for me, is that I have struggled with insomnia before. I am also not a good sleeper like you. And something that has really helped me is brain dumping my thoughts before going to bed. And so I have found my brain is like a problem solving machine. And if something is bouncing around in my head, I will chew over it again and again until my mind feels like I can come to some sort of a solution or a decision. And that's not always helpful at, 10 or 11 p.m. when you're trying to go to bed. And so for me, getting those thoughts out of my head and onto the paper helps me feel like I've mentally put a check mark on them. I've put them somewhere, they are stored. I know I won't lose those ideas, but it's sort of a releasing technique for my mind to feel like, okay, I don't have to think about that right now. We've captured those somewhere and now it's time to sleep. So that's something I find personally very helpful.
That sounds really helpful. And you busted the bedtime routine myth, but what about that 6 to 8 hours a night? Is that super
Yeah.
rigid? Do you need 8 hours of sleep a night, or does that change person to person?
No, according to Dr. Wu, you do not need 8 hours of sleep per night. She gave the example of, think about someone who is a professional athlete versus someone who's a couch potato. They don't have the same energy or recovery needs. Or someone who is a pregnant person, for example, and literally building another human. They may have a higher drive and need for rest than someone else. And our relationship with sleep and our ability to sleep also changes as we age. Most older adults have trouble sleeping longer. They may wake up more, for example. Whereas if anybody has had a teenager, they can sleep for hours and hours on end because they're growing physically, their brain is growing, they're consolidating information in their mind. And so each of us has different needs, and it's important to understand what your personal picture is, as well as that idea of your chronotype that I mentioned earlier, understanding what are your natural rhythms and what does that suggest about when you should be waking up versus when you should be going to bed.
And how do you put this in context of being a working professional? I am a night owl, but I do have pretty early hours in the morning. So what should I do?
Yeah, this is a challenge because the world is not really made for night owls. And I think you have to know yourself. So I have folks in my family who are night owls, and they find that their most productive hours are 1 to 3 a.m., for example. And so I think you have to work around what your type is. And to the extent possible, if you are someone who tends to be a night owl, can you change your schedule a little bit so that in the early mornings, maybe you don't have meetings in particular that you have to get to at a certain time? It's tough though, because like I said, the world is not necessarily made for people who are night owls.
Let's move it even a step further. You're a working professional, you're out on the road for work, on a business trip somewhere, and your environment has changed. What can you do to ensure you still have a good, restful night's sleep?
Yeah. Dr. Wu gave a great example that when she travels, she brings her eye mask everywhere. And for her, she suggested that that's a cue for her to go to bed, that, okay, just like when we're at home, it's time to go to sleep. And having that stability and that consistency, even though she's in a new environment, is really helpful. And of course, there's the practical reason of blocking out the light that may be coming through the windows. I know I have stayed in hotel rooms that are right across the street from a lot of places with neon signs shining in the window. And so be thinking about, how can I provide some consistency to my bedtime routine? How can I bring pieces from home and bring that with me when I travel?
A theme you've been bringing up is consistency, listening to your body. In your conversation with Dr. Wu, who is a sleep psychologist, what other things surprised you, resonated with you, things that you're going to practice?
I think one of the other things that surprised me, or that I'm certainly taking away, is this idea that me time shouldn't be spent scrolling social media. I am so guilty of that as soon as I have a moment of open time or at the end of the day, my fingers are are gravitating right over to social media to check that. But, she was really advising that your me time should be spent doing something with your hands, catching up with a friend, doing something that nourishes you in some way. And so personally, I find that reading fiction books is a great way to take my mind off of business and career and personal matters and really dive into something else. And so I think that's a good takeaway for all of us, that your me time should truly be your time, not social media time.
I'm definitely guilty of mindless me time as well, so I will take all of these things into consideration. Melody Wilding, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.